Danny Wright sat alone in the engine room of the Horizon's Edge, his fingers working through the tangle of power cables with practiced ease. The hum of the ship's reactor provided the only sound that felt like company anymore. He was 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, and he had never felt more isolated in his entire life. The corridors outside echoed with the heavy footfalls of the Crithian crew. They were everywhere on this ship, towering figures that stood nearly 8 feet tall with muscles like corded steel and eyes that gleamed with predatory intelligence. Their skin was thick and scaled, ranging from deep crimson to dark gray, and when they moved it was with the fluid grace of born hunters. Danny had read everything he could about them before accepting this posting, but nothing had prepared him for what it felt like to live among them. He heard them now, their voices carrying through the ventilation shafts. They were laughing, that harsh barking sound that Crithians made when they found something amusing. Danny didn't need to guess what they were laughing about. It was probably him. It usually was. Soft skin can't even lift a standard supply crate, one of them had said yesterday, loud enough for Danny to hear. The others had found this hilarious, their laughter following Danny as he'd hurried away with burning cheeks. The worst part was that it was true. The supply crates were designed for Crithian strength, and Danny could barely budge them without mechanical assistance. Everything on this ship was built for beings twice his size and 3 times his strength. Even the doorways made him feel small. Danny finished reconnecting the power relay and sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead. The engine room was always hot, but he preferred it here. The machines didn't judge him. They didn't care that he was human, that he was weak by Crithian standards, that his species had never developed the savage efficiency that came from evolving on a deathworld. Earth was a paradise compared to Crith. Danny had seen the videos during his training. Crith was a planet where everything wanted to kill you, where survival meant being faster, stronger, and more vicious than everything else. The Crithians had clawed their way to the top of their food chain through sheer brutality, and they had never forgotten those lessons. To them, strength was everything. Weakness was shameful, and Danny was weak. At least that's what they saw when they looked at him. The door to the engine room slid open with a hiss. Danny looked up to see Lisa Morgan, the ship's pilot, stepping inside. She was one of only 3 humans on the Horizon's Edge, and she usually kept her distance from Danny. Her expression was carefully neutral as she approached. "Commander Vexthor wants you on the bridge," she said. Her voice was flat, professional. She didn't quite meet his eyes. Danny nodded and stood, grabbing his toolkit. "Did he say why?" Lisa shrugged. "Does he ever?" She turned to leave, then paused. "Danny, just keep your head down up there, okay? Don't volunteer for anything." Before Danny could ask what she meant, Lisa was gone. He sighed and made his way through the corridors toward the bridge, keeping close to the walls as Crithian crew members passed him. None of them acknowledged his presence. To them, he was invisible unless they wanted to mock him. The bridge was a wide, open space dominated by tactical displays and weapon stations. Commander Vexthor stood at the center, his massive frame silhouetted against the view screen that showed the stars streaking past. He was one of the largest Crithians Danny had ever seen. His scales a deep crimson that spoke of countless battles. Scars crossed his arms and chest, each one a badge of honor in Crithian culture. "Engineer Wright," Vexthor said without turning around. His voice was like gravel grinding together. "The starboard thruster array is operating at 92% efficiency. Explain." Danny swallowed. "The power couplings are aging, Commander. They're within acceptable parameters, but I've scheduled them for replacement at our next port. Acceptable is not optimal." Vexthor finally turned, his yellow eyes fixed on Danny. "A warrior's weapon must be perfect or it becomes a liability. This ship is our weapon. Yes, Commander. I can boost efficiency to 95% with the parts we have on board. But full optimization will require... Do it." Vexthor dismissed him with a wave of his clawed hand. Danny was turning to leave when the communications station began to pulse with an incoming signal. The officer at the station, a scarred Crithian named Dextar, brought it up on the main screen. "Distress call, Commander. It's coming from Keswick 4, the mining colony in Sector 7. The bridge fell silent. Vexthor stepped closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. The message was fragmentary, breaking up with static, but the words that came through were clear enough. Under attack. Unknown hostiles. Colonists dead. Please, anyone. Need immediate evacuation. The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by the cold hiss of dead air. Vexthor's lips pulled back from his teeth, showing the sharp fangs that all Crithians possessed. Set course for Keswick 4, maximum speed. He turned to his crew, and Danny saw something kindle in those predatory eyes. Excitement, anticipation. Prepare a hunting party. Whatever attacked that colony, we will find it and kill it. The Crithian crew responded with enthusiastic growls and the clattering of weapons being checked. This was what they lived for. The hunt, the fight, the kill. Danny felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. He'd never been in a real combat situation before. His training had been simulations and drills, safe scenarios where nobody actually died. But this was real. People were dead on that colony, and whatever had killed them was still there. Right, you will remain on the ship during the operation, Vexthor said, not even looking at him. We have no need for soft hands on a hunt. Danny felt the familiar burn of shame, but he forced himself to nod. Understood, Commander. As he left the bridge, he heard the Crithians already discussing tactics, their voices eager and fierce. They would go down to that colony and face whatever horrors waited there, while Danny stayed safely aboard the ship. Because he was weak. Because he was human. Because he was prey, not a hunter. He returned to the engine room and threw himself into work, trying to push away the thoughts that crowded his mind. He boosted the thruster efficiency like Vexthor had ordered, recalibrated the power distribution, ran diagnostics on every system he could think of. But none of it could drown out the voice in his head that kept asking the same question over and over. What was he doing here? Why had he been chosen for this posting if all he was ever going to be was a joke? The diversity exchange program was supposed to foster understanding between species, but all it had done was make Danny feel more alone than ever. The Crithians would never respect him. They couldn't, because respect had to be earned through strength, and he would never be strong enough by their standards. Later that evening, Danny made his way to the small quarters he'd been assigned. The room was tiny even by human standards, barely large enough for a bed and a small desk. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled up his personal display, scrolling through messages from home. His mom had sent another worried email asking how he was doing. He hadn't told her the truth. He'd said everything was fine, that he was learning a lot, that the crew was professional and welcoming, all lies. Greg Palmer, the ship's medical officer and the only other human besides Lisa, passed by Danny's open door. He glanced in, saw Danny sitting there, and for a moment it looked like he might stop and say something. But then Greg's expression closed off and he kept walking. Danny understood. Greg and Lisa had been on this ship for 2 years before Danny arrived. They had learned to survive by keeping their heads down, by not drawing attention, by accepting their place in the hierarchy. Defending Danny would only bring the Crithians' mockery down on them too, so Danny was alone. He lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the Crithians preparing for their hunt. Tomorrow they would arrive at Keswick 4. Tomorrow they would face danger while he hid in the safety of the ship. Tomorrow would be just like every other day aboard the horizon's edge. Danny closed his eyes and tried to sleep, unaware that tomorrow would change everything. Unaware that the hunt they were preparing for would become something none of them expected. Unaware that his greatest test was approaching fast, and that when it came, he would have to choose between safety and courage. The horizon's edge rushed through space toward Keswick 4, carrying them all toward destiny. The horizon's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a shudder that Danny felt through the ship's frame. He was on the bridge this time, not because anyone wanted him there, but because all crew members were required to be at their stations during planetary approach. He stood at the engineering console, his hands moving across the controls as he monitored the ship's systems. The view screen showed Keswick 4 growing larger as they approached. It was a brown and gray planet, covered in rocky desert and deep canyons. The mining colony had been built in one of those canyons, taking advantage of the rich mineral deposits in the rock walls. It should have been lit up with activity, visible even from orbit. Instead, there was only darkness. Life signs? Vexthor asked, his voice tight. Dextar worked his console, then shook his head. Minimal. I'm detecting perhaps 6 or 7 signatures in the colony, but they're weak. Possibly injured. The rest, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The colony had housed nearly 300 people. If only 6 or 7 were left alive, that meant the attack had been devastating. Vexthor's claws drummed against his command chair. "Take us into low orbit. Prepare the assault shuttle." He stood and turned to face his crew. "I will lead the hunting party. Karnix, you're with me." A massive Krithian rose from his seat at the weapons station. Karnix was a legend among his people, a hunter who had tracked and killed prey on dozens of worlds. His scales were darker than most, nearly black, and his body was covered in scars that told the story of a lifetime of battles. When he moved, it was with absolute confidence. He feared nothing. "Finally a worthy hunt," Karnix growled, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Too long we have flown between stars with nothing to kill." Vexthor selected 5 more Krithians for the hunting party, each one a trained warrior. They would go down to the surface armed and armored, ready for whatever had destroyed the colony. Danny watched them prepare and felt a familiar mixture of fear and envy. They were so certain, so ready for violence. They never seemed to doubt themselves. "Commander," Danny found himself saying, surprising even himself, "I'd like to volunteer for the ground team." The bridge went quiet. Every Krithian turned to stare at him. Vexthor's expression was unreadable. "Why would you volunteer for this, right?" the commander asked slowly. Danny's mouth went dry, but he forced himself to continue. "I'm an engineer. If the colony's systems are damaged, you might need someone who can access terminals or repair equipment to find out what happened." For a moment, he thought Vexthor might actually consider it. But then Karnix laughed, that harsh barking sound that made Danny's face burn. "The soft skin wants to hunt," Karnix said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Tell me, little human, have you ever killed anything? Have you ever tracked prey through dangerous terrain? Have you ever faced death and spat in its face?" Danny couldn't answer. They all knew he hadn't. "This is not a repair job," Vexthor said, his tone final. "This is a hunt, and hunts are for hunters. You will remain on the ship with the other humans." "That is an order." Danny nodded stiffly and stepped back from his console. He felt every eye on him as he left the bridge, heard the Krithians' amused comments following him down the corridor. Another humiliation to add to the growing collection. He made his way to the observation deck, a small room with a wide window that looked out at the planet below. Lisa was already there, watching as the assault shuttle detached from the horizon's edge and began its descent toward the surface. "You shouldn't have volunteered," Lisa said quietly. "It just gives them more ammunition." "I know," Danny replied. I thought maybe I could help." "The best way you can help is by staying alive and keeping the ship running while they're gone." Lisa glanced at him, and for the first time since Danny had come aboard, he saw something like sympathy in her eyes. "Look, I know it's hard, but this is their culture. They respect strength and combat prowess because that's what kept them alive on their world. We come from a gentler place. That doesn't make us weak, it just makes us different." "Try telling them that," Danny muttered. Lisa sighed. "I did when I first came aboard. It didn't go well. You learn to pick your battles, Danny. You learn to survive by being good at what you do and not trying to be something you're not." She left him there, and Danny pressed his hand against the window, watching the shuttle disappear into Keswick 4's atmosphere. Part of him was relieved to be safe on the ship. But another part, a part that was growing harder to ignore, was tired of being safe, tired of being protected, tired of being treated like something fragile that needed to be kept away from danger. Hours passed. Danny monitored the hunting party's progress from the bridge, listening to their communications. They had landed near the colony and were moving through the structures, searching for survivors and signs of the attackers. What they found was carnage. "Bodies everywhere," Dextar reported, his voice coming through with static. "Torn apart. Whatever did this was savage." Vexthor's voice came next. "Spread out. Find survivors. Find tracks. We need to know what we're hunting." Danny watched the tracking display, seeing the small dots that represented the Krithian hunters moving through the colony's ruins. They moved with tactical precision, covering each other, clearing buildings one by one. Professional, efficient, everything Danny was not. Then Karnix's voice crackled through the speakers, sharp with excitement. "Commander, I have tracks, large, multiple creatures moving as a pack." They went into the central hub. "All teams converge on the hub," Vexthor ordered. Danny leaned forward, his heart pounding. The central hub was the largest structure in the colony, a massive building that housed the administrative offices and the main control systems. If there were survivors, they might have taken shelter there. The tracking dots moved across his screen, coming together at the hub's location. Then for several long minutes there was only silence from the surface. "Commander?" Dextar's voice finally came through. "What are these things?" "Ravagers," Vexthor said, and for the first time Danny heard something in the commander's voice that might have been concern. "Illegal bioweapons. Someone must have been breeding them here." Greg Palmer appeared at Danny's side, having come to the bridge to monitor the medical situation. "Ravagers?" he asked. "What are those?" Danny pulled up the information on his console. What he read made his blood run cold. Ravagers were creatures designed for one purpose: to kill. They had been created by a rogue scientist decades ago, engineered to be the perfect predators. 12 feet tall, armored hide, incredible speed and strength, and intelligence just high enough to make them terrifying. They hunted in packs and felt no fear. Governments across the galaxy had banned them, hunting down and destroying every specimen they could find. But clearly, someone on Keswick 4 had been keeping them in secret, and something had gone wrong. "Commander, recommend immediate withdrawal," Karnak said, his voice tense. "These creatures are extremely dangerous. We need heavier weapons and more hunters." But before Vexthor could respond, the communications erupted with sounds of combat. Roaring, the discharge of weapons, Crithian battle cries mixing with inhuman shrieks. Danny's hands gripped the console as he listened to the chaos. "Fall back," Vexthor shouted. "Tactical retreat to the shuttle." The tracking dots on Danny's screen began to move, but they weren't all moving together anymore. Some were running. Others were stationary. And one dot, Danny realized with growing horror, was separated from the rest. "Karnak's report." Vexthor's voice was urgent, static. Then Karnak's voice strained with pain. "Trapped in the hub. Leg injured. Go, Commander. I will hold them here." "Negative, we're coming back for you." "No." Karnak's voice was firm despite the pain. "You'll die trying. These Ravagers are too fast, too strong. Even for us, leave me. Complete the mission." Danny listened to the argument that followed, heard the desperation in Vexthor's voice fighting against tactical reality. The Crithians were brave, they were fierce, but they weren't stupid. Karnak's was right. Going back for him would mean losing more hunters. Finally, Vexthor made the call that no commander wanted to make. "Acknowledged. May your death be worthy of song, brother." The remaining hunters retreated to their shuttle and lifted off, leaving Karnak's behind in the ruins. The bridge of the horizon's edge was silent as the shuttle docked. When Vexthor and his surviving hunters came onto the bridge, Danny saw something he'd never seen before on a Crithian face. Shame. They had left one of their own behind. It violated everything their culture stood for. But what choice had they had? Vexthor stood at his command station, staring at the planet below. "We'll call for a military strike team. They'll have the weapons and numbers needed to extract Karnak's and eliminate the Ravagers." "How long until they arrive?" Dexter asked. 48 hours at best. Everyone knew what that meant. Karnak's didn't have 48 hours. He probably didn't have 48 minutes. Danny stood at his console staring at the tracking display. Karnak's dot was still there, still transmitting, but it was stationary. Injured. Trapped. Waiting to die. And in that moment, Danny made a decision that would change everything. Danny waited until the night cycle, when most of the crew was resting. He moved through the corridors quietly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct he had was screaming at him that this was insane, that he was going to get himself killed, that he should turn back. But he kept moving anyway. He made his way to the medical bay first. Greg was there, organizing supplies after treating the minor injuries the hunting party had sustained. Greg looked up in surprise when Danny entered. "Danny? What are you doing here?" "It's 0200. I need emergency medical supplies," Danny said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The advanced stuff. Trauma kits, pain suppressors, bone stabilizers." Greg's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Danny met his gaze. "Karnak's is still alive down there. I'm gonna get him." For a long moment, Greg just stared at him. Then he shook his head slowly. "Danny, no. That's suicide. You heard what happened. Those Ravagers tore through 7 Crithian hunters like they were nothing. What do you think you can do?" "I don't know," Danny admitted. "But I have to try. He's down there alone, waiting to die. Everyone else has given up on him. They haven't given up. They're being realistic. Danny, you're not a soldier. You're not a hunter. You'll just die down there, and then what will that accomplish? Danny started gathering supplies himself, loading them into a pack. Maybe I'll die. Probably I'll die, but at least I'll have tried. At least I won't have to live knowing I could have done something and didn't. Greg was quiet for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he began helping Danny pack the medical supplies. "You're an idiot," he said softly. "A brave idiot, but an idiot nonetheless." "I know." Greg handed him the last trauma kit, then gripped Danny's shoulder. "Come back alive. Both of you." Danny nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and left the medical bay. His next stop was the armory. It took him 20 minutes to bypass the security lock, his hands shaking as he worked. Inside, he found racks of weapons designed for Crithian hands, massive and heavy. He took a standard sidearm, the smallest weapon available, and it still felt huge in his grip. He also grabbed a plasma cutter, the kind used for emergency hull repairs. It wasn't designed as a weapon, but it could cut through almost anything. Finally, he made his way to the shuttle bay. The secondary shuttle sat waiting, smaller than the assault shuttle but easier for one person to pilot. Danny had flown shuttles during his training, but never in combat conditions. His hands trembled as he ran through the pre-flight checklist. "You're really doing this?" Danny spun around to find Lisa standing in the doorway of the shuttle. She had her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Lisa, Save it," she interrupted. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to tell you that I delayed the bridge sensors for the shuttle bay. You've got a 10-minute window before anyone notices you're gone." Danny stared at her. "Why?" Lisa shrugged. "Because maybe someone should try. Because maybe we've all been playing it too safe for too long. Because..." She paused, then continued quietly. "Because Carnix doesn't deserve to die alone in the dark, and you're the only one crazy enough to do something about it." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Danny, don't try to be a hero. Be smart, use that brain of yours. It's your only advantage." Then she was gone, and Danny was alone with his fear and his determination. He climbed into the pilot's seat, secured his harness, and began the launch sequence. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, and the bay doors began to open, revealing the planet below. Danny took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to anyone who might be listening, and launched the shuttle into the void. The descent through Keswick 4's atmosphere was rough. The shuttle bucked and shook, and Danny's hands ached from gripping the controls so tightly. Warning alarms blared as he pushed the shuttle faster than was safe, knowing that every second counted. The colony appeared on his screens, dark and dead in the night. He brought the shuttle down near the central hub, landing harder than he intended. The impact jarred his teeth, but the shuttle held together. Danny sat there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to gather his courage. Through the viewport, he could see the ruins of the colony, shadows moving in the darkness. The Ravagers were still here, hunting, waiting. Danny forced himself to move. He grabbed his pack of medical supplies, checked the sidearm and plasma cutter, and opened the shuttle's door. The night air of Keswick 4 was cold and smelled of dust and something else, something metallic and wrong. Blood. He activated his helmet's light and started moving toward the central hub. His engineering training helped him navigate the ruins. He could see how the buildings had been torn apart, recognized the stress patterns in the broken metal and concrete. The Ravagers had incredible strength, but they had also been systematic in their destruction. They were intelligent enough to flush out hiding prey. Danny's motion sensors, small devices he'd pulled from his repair kit, he started placing at key junctions as he moved. They would ping his helmet display if anything large moved nearby. It wasn't much, but it was something. The central hub loomed ahead, its entrance a gaping wound in the structure's face. Danny paused at the threshold, his heart racing. Inside was darkness and danger. Inside was almost certain death. Inside was Carnix. Danny stepped through the entrance. The interior of the hub was a maze of collapsed corridors and destroyed rooms. Danny used his plasma cutter to cut through blocked passages, moving slowly and carefully. His motion sensors remained quiet, but that only made him more nervous. Where were the Ravagers? He found Carnix in what had once been the main control room. The great Crithian hunter was pinned beneath a fallen support beam, his left leg crushed and twisted at an unnatural angle. Green blood pooled around him. His eyes were closed, and for a terrible moment Danny thought he was too late. Then Carnix's eyes opened. They fixed on Danny with confusion and disbelief. "Why, Karnix's voice was barely a whisper. Why would prey come for a hunter? Danny didn't answer. He was already moving, dropping his pack and pulling out the plasma cutter. The support beam was heavy and made of reinforced alloy. It would take time to cut through it, time they might not have. You should not be here, Softskin, Karnix said. His voice was weak but held a note of concern. The Ravagers will return. They circle back to check their kills. Then we'd better hurry, Danny said, trying to sound confident. His hands were shaking as he activated the plasma cutter and began working on the beam. The work was slow and delicate. Cut too close and he risked hurting Karnix further. Cut too far away and the beam wouldn't release. Sweat dripped down Danny's face as he worked, the plasma cutter's bright light casting wild shadows on the walls. That's when his motion sensors pinged. Danny's helmet display lit up with warnings. 3 large signatures moving through the hub toward their location. The Ravagers had detected them. Go, Karnix said urgently. Run while you still can. Danny ignored him and kept cutting. The beam was almost through. Just a few more seconds. The first Ravager appeared in the doorway. It was even more terrifying in person than in the database images. 12 feet of armored nightmare with multiple eyes that gleamed with cruel intelligence. Its jaws opened to reveal rows of teeth like serrated blades. When it saw them, it let out a sound that was part roar, part shriek, a sound that made Danny's entire body want to shut down in fear. But Danny didn't run. He couldn't. Karnix couldn't move, and leaving him meant death. So instead, Danny did the only thing he could think of. He threw a fuel cell from his pack at the Ravager and shot it with his sidearm. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was enough. Fire blossomed in the doorway and the Ravager fell back, shrieking. Danny used those precious seconds to finish cutting through the beam. It fell away with a crash and Karnix groaned in pain. Can you move? Danny asked urgently. Karnix tried to stand and immediately collapsed. No, my leg is useless. 2 more Ravagers appeared at different entrances to the control room. They had circled around, cutting off escape. Danny's mind raced. He couldn't fight them. He couldn't carry Karnix. He couldn't run, but he could think. Danny looked around the control room with an engineer's eye. Unstable ceiling. Exposed power conduits. Damaged support columns. The room was a death trap waiting to happen. And suddenly he had a plan. A crazy, desperate plan. Danny grabbed one of the damaged power conduits and ripped it free from the wall. Sparks flew as electricity arced across the exposed wiring. The Ravagers hesitated, their multiple eyes fixed on this small creature that seemed to have lost its mind. What are you doing? Karnix demanded, his voice tight with pain and confusion. Making this place as dangerous for them as possible, Danny said. He threw the live conduit across the floor, creating a barrier of crackling electricity. One Ravager tried to leap over it and screamed as the current burned through its legs. It fell back and the smell of burning flesh filled the air. Danny didn't wait. He grabbed Karnix under the arms and began dragging him toward a maintenance tunnel he'd spotted earlier. The Crithian was heavy, incredibly heavy, and Karnix's broken leg dragged uselessly behind them. Every meter was agony, Danny's muscles screaming in protest. Behind them, the Ravagers were finding ways around the electrical barrier. They were smart, adapting to his trick. Danny could hear them coming, their claws clicking on the floor, their breathing harsh and eager. He got Karnix into the maintenance tunnel and used his plasma cutter to seal the entrance behind them. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy them a few minutes. The tunnel was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for Karnix's broad frame. Danny had to drag him backward, unable to see where he was going, guided only by the tunnel's walls. You're insane, Karnix said, but there was something new in his voice now. A mockery? Something closer to respect, probably, Danny agreed. His arms felt like they were on fire, and his back screamed in protest with every movement. But he kept going. They emerged into what looked like a storage area. Crates and equipment were scattered everywhere, most of it broken. Danny's motion sensors pinged again. The Ravagers had breached the sealed entrance and were coming through the tunnel. Danny looked around desperately. He needed another trick, another trap, another few minutes. His eyes fell on a series of support columns that looked badly damaged. An idea formed. Karnix, can you use your weapon? Danny asked. The Crithian hunter pulled out his pistol with his good hand. Yes, but I have limited ammunition. That's okay. I just need you to shoot when I tell you to. Danny positioned Karnix behind a heavy crate that would provide cover, then began setting up fuel cells and damaged power cells around the support columns. He worked quickly, his fingers steady despite his fear. This was what he was good at. This was what all those years of studying engineering had taught him. How to build things, how to break things, how to make systems do what he wanted. The first Ravager emerged from the tunnel, its eyes scanning the room. It spotted them immediately and let out that terrible shriek calling to its packmates. "Not yet," Danny whispered to Carnix. He pulled out a piece of reflective metal and positioned it so he could see around the crate without exposing himself. The second Ravager appeared. Then the third. All three of them were now in the storage area, moving cautiously toward the crate. They had learned that this prey was dangerous in unexpected ways. "Now," Danny shouted. Carnix fired at the fuel cells. The explosions came in sequence, each one triggering the next. But Danny hadn't positioned them to kill the Ravagers directly. Instead, the explosions took out the damaged support columns. The ceiling came down with a roar of breaking concrete and twisted metal. One Ravager was crushed instantly. Another was trapped, half its body pinned. The third managed to dodge, but falling debris had blocked its path to Danny and Carnix. Danny didn't wait to see if his trap had worked perfectly. He grabbed Carnix and started dragging him again, moving deeper into the hub. They found a small office that was mostly intact, and Danny pulled Carnix inside and sealed the door. For the first time since entering the hub, they had a moment to breathe. Danny immediately began working on Carnix's leg, using the medical supplies he'd brought. His hands shook as he administered pain suppressors and began stabilizing the broken bone. He wasn't a doctor, but Greg had trained all the crew in basic trauma care. Carnix watched him work, his yellow eyes thoughtful. "You fight like nothing I've ever seen," the Crithian said quietly. "You do not meet strength with strength. You do not fight with honor or courage. You fight with cunning and desperation." "I fight to survive," Danny said, not looking up from his work. "That's all I know how to do." "That is the oldest form of combat," Carnix replied. "My ancestors, before they became hunters, when they were still prey on the killing grounds of Krith, they fought like you. They used the world itself as a weapon. They turned their weakness into strength through intelligence." He paused. "I had forgotten those lessons. We all had. We became so focused on being strong that we forgot the value of being clever." Danny finished stabilizing the leg and sat back, exhausted. His entire body ached and he was covered in dust, blood, and sweat. "Can you walk?" "With support." Carnix tested the stabilized leg and grimaced. "It will hold for now." They rested for a while, catching their breath. Danny monitored his motion sensors, but the remaining Ravagers seemed to have lost their trail for the moment. He used the time to examine the office, looking for anything useful. He found emergency flares, more tools, and a detailed map of the hub on a still-functioning terminal. "We need to get back to my shuttle," Danny said, studying the map. "But the direct route is blocked. We'll have to go through the lower levels. Those levels are unstable," Carnix warned. "The colony engineers were supposed to reinforce them, but never completed the work." "Unstable is good," Danny said. "Makes it harder for the Ravagers to follow us." They moved out, Carnix leaning heavily on Danny's shoulder. The weight was tremendous, but Danny gritted his teeth and bore it. They navigated through corridors that tilted at odd angles, past rooms where the floor had partially collapsed, through passages so narrow they had to move sideways. The Ravagers found them again in a long hallway that was listing badly to one side. Danny heard them coming, that distinctive clicking of their claws, and his heart sank. He and Carnix couldn't move fast enough to run. "Leave me," Carnix said. "Take the map and go." "Get to your shuttle." "No." Danny's voice was firm. He looked around the hallway with desperate eyes, searching for something, anything he could use. The hallway's floor was cracked, he noticed. And beneath it he could see more damage, structural failure that went down several levels. The entire section was ready to collapse. It just needed the right trigger. Danny had one fuel cell left. "When I tell you to," he said to Carnix, "grab that door frame and hold on." "What are you doing?" Danny didn't answer. He placed the fuel cell at the exact point where the floor's cracks intersected, then pulled Carnix to the doorframe of a room that looked like it had better structural support. The Ravagers appeared at the end of the hallway. Two of them now. The third had either died or given up. These two looked wounded, burned, and angry. They saw Danny and Carnix and charged. Danny waited until they were directly over the weakest point in the floor. Then he shot the fuel cell. The explosion was small, but it was enough. The floor gave way and both Ravagers fell through, their shrieks of fury turning to surprise as they dropped. Danny heard them crashing through multiple levels, heard the sound of more structural collapse. Then, silence. Danny and Carnix clung to the doorframe as the hallway shook and settled. When everything stopped moving, they were on a narrow ledge of intact floor, with a gaping hole where the hallway had been. "You used yourself as bait," Carnix said, his voice filled with something that might have been awe. "You calculated the exact moment to trigger the collapse. You turned the entire building into a weapon." "I was terrified the entire time," Danny admitted. His legs felt weak and he wasn't sure he could stand much longer. "Fear and courage are not opposites," Carnix said. "Courage is acting despite fear. What you did, dragging me through death's mouth while your body shook with terror, that is true courage." They made their way carefully around the collapse, through damaged rooms and emergency passages, until finally, miraculously, they reached the ground level. Through a broken wall, Danny could see his shuttle waiting in the distance. They had almost made it. But as they limped toward the shuttle, Danny's sensors pinged one last time. From the shadows of the hub, the first Ravager emerged, the one that had been burned by the initial explosion. It was wounded, limping, but still alive. Still hunting, it stood between them and the shuttle. And Danny was out of tricks, out of fuel cells, out of ideas. The Ravager opened its jaws and roared its challenge. Carnix reached down and removed the ceremonial blade from his belt. It was a beautiful weapon, curved and deadly, covered in etchings that told the story of his hunts. He offered it to Danny. "End this, brother," Carnix said quietly. Danny took the blade with trembling hands. It was heavier than he expected, perfectly balanced, a weapon made for killing. He had never held anything like it before. The Ravager watched him, its multiple eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. It was wounded, but it was still more than capable of tearing them both apart. For a moment, Danny's mind went blank with terror. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything but face this monster. He was an engineer. He fixed things. He solved problems with math and logic. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a hunter, but Carnix couldn't run, and Danny had come too far to quit now. The Ravager charged. Danny's body moved before his mind could catch up. He didn't try to meet the creature's charge head-on. That would have been suicide. Instead, he dropped low and rolled to the side, the way he'd seen the Crithians practice in their combat drills. The Ravager's claws whistled through the air where Danny's head had been a moment before. The creature was fast, but it was wounded. Its movements were slightly off, favoring its burned side. Danny's engineering mind automatically cataloged this information, seeing patterns and weaknesses the way he'd see stress points in a damaged structure. The Ravager spun and lunged again. This time Danny didn't dodge. He couldn't, because if he moved, Carnix would be exposed. So instead, he did something crazy. He moved toward the creature inside its reach, using its own momentum against it. The blade in his hands found the soft tissue beneath the armored jaw, driving upward with all the strength Danny had left. The Ravager screamed, a sound that would haunt Danny's dreams for years. It thrashed, trying to throw him off, but Danny held on desperately. Green blood sprayed across his face, hot and burning. The creature's claws raked across his side, tearing through his suit and the flesh beneath, but Danny's grip never loosened. Finally, the Ravager's movement slowed, then stopped. It collapsed, and Danny went down with it, still holding the blade, unable to let go. For a long moment, he just lay there, his body screaming in pain, his mind unable to process that he was still alive. Then he felt Carnix's hand on his shoulder pulling him up. "You killed it," the Crithian said, and his voice carried a weight that Danny didn't understand. "You alone killed a Ravager in single combat." Danny looked down at his hands, at the blood covering them. He started shaking, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving him weak. I had to. For both of us." Carnix pulled Danny to his feet, and together they limped to the shuttle. Danny's wound was bleeding badly, and his vision kept trying to blur. He managed to get them both aboard and sealed the door. The shuttle's medical system immediately began treating his injuries, spraying synthetic skin over the gashes. The flight back to the horizon's edge was a blur. Danny remembered setting the autopilot, remembered Carnix beginning to sing something in his own language, a deep, rhythmic chant that seemed to fill the small shuttle cabin. Later he would learn it was a hunting song, sacred to the Crithians, sung only for warriors who had proven themselves in the most demanding trials. The shuttle docked with the horizon's edge, and the airlock opened to reveal what looked like the entire crew. Vexthor stood at the front, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Lisa, Greg, and all the Crithian crew members stared in disbelief. "You fool," Vexthor said, but his voice lacked its usual edge. "You disobeyed direct orders. You stole a shuttle. You endangered yourself unnecessarily." "Yes, Commander," Danny said. He was too tired to argue, too tired to defend himself. He had done what he needed to do, and if that meant facing punishment, so be it. "He saved my life," Karnak said, limping forward. "This human, this one you all called weak, came into Death's house and pulled me out. He killed 3 Ravagers using nothing but his mind and courage. He carried me when I could not walk. He stood between me and certain death." The Crithian crew stirred, murmuring among themselves. This was not something they had expected to hear. Karnax turned to face the assembled crew. "I am the finest hunter among you. I have tracked prey across 100 worlds. I have killed creatures that would make most of you flee in terror. And I tell you now, I have never seen anyone fight the way this human fought." He moved closer to Danny, towering over the young human. Then, with deliberate ceremony, Karnax drew a claw across his own palm, letting green blood pool. He pressed his bleeding hand against Danny's forehead, marking him with the traditional Crithian symbol for packmate. The blood was warm and sticky, and Danny stood frozen, not understanding what was happening. "By the old laws of Crith, by the bonds of the hunt, I name you kin," Karnak said, his voice carrying through the docking bay. "You are my brother in blood and battle. Any who insult you insults me. Any who questions your courage questions mine." The silence that followed was profound. Danny looked around at the Crithian faces and saw shock, respect, and in some cases something that might have been shame. They had mocked this human, called him weak, treated him as less than nothing, and he had done what none of them had dared to do. Vexthor stepped forward. "Karnax is our greatest hunter. His word carries more weight than mine in matters of honor and courage." The commander looked at Danny, and for the first time, there was no contempt in his eyes. "Welcome to the pack, Engineer Wright." The following days were strange for Danny. The Crithian crew members who had mocked him now nodded respectfully when they passed him in the corridors. They invited him to their training sessions, and while he still couldn't match their physical strength, they watched with fascination as he showed them different ways of thinking about combat. How to use the environment, how to turn disadvantages into advantages, how to fight smarter when you couldn't fight harder. Karnax became his constant companion and teacher. The great hunter taught Danny Crithian fighting techniques, while Danny taught Karnax human problem-solving methods. They formed an unlikely friendship, the legendary warrior and the young engineer learning from each other. Lisa and Greg seemed relieved, as if Danny had somehow validated their own presence on the ship. They started eating meals together, sharing stories, building the community that had been missing before. 2 weeks after the incident on Keswick 4, Danny was working in the engine room when Karnax found him. The Crithian's leg had healed thanks to their advanced medical technology, and he moved with his old grace. "The commander wants to see you on the bridge," Karnax said. "There's been another distress call." Danny felt his stomach tighten. He wasn't sure he was ready for another mission, another fight. The wounds on his side had healed, but the memories were still fresh. "I'm scared," Danny admitted quietly. "Last time I thought I was going to die." "You were scared last time too," Karnax pointed out. "But you went anyway. That is what makes you kin, not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it." They walked to the bridge together. Vexthor was there, along with the rest of the senior crew. When Danny entered, the commander turned to him. "We've received a distress call from a transport ship. They're having engine trouble and drifting toward a gravity well. We're the closest ship, but the situation is delicate. The engine work will need to be done in hazardous conditions." Vexthor paused. "I'm asking for volunteers for the repair team." Danny looked at the data on the screens. The job would be dangerous, requiring someone to work in an unstable environment while the ship was being pulled by gravitational forces. It was exactly the kind of situation where being small, nimble, and good with tools would matter more than being strong. He thought about staying silent, about letting someone else volunteer. No one would blame him. He'd already proven himself. But then he caught Karnax's eye, saw the slight nod of encouragement, and realized something important. He hadn't gone to Keswick 4 to prove anything to the Crithians. He'd gone because someone needed help and he was capable of providing it. That hadn't changed. It never would. I'll go, Danny said. Vexthor nodded, a slight smile crossing his scarred face. Good. Karnix, you'll accompany him. The rest of you, prepare for emergency operations. As the crew dispersed to their stations, Karnix placed a heavy hand on Danny's shoulder. Nervous? Terrified, Danny admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Fear keeps you alive. Karnix's voice held a note of pride. You're learning, brother. Danny made his way to the shuttle bay, his hands steady despite his racing heart. He was still afraid. He would probably always be afraid when facing danger. But he'd learned something important in the ruins of Keswick 4. Being brave didn't mean being fearless. Being strong didn't mean being the biggest or the toughest. Being worthy didn't mean being something you weren't. Danny was an engineer. He fixed things. He solved problems. And when people needed help, he helped them. Even when it scared him. Especially when it scared him, that was enough. That had always been enough. He just hadn't known it until a legendary hunter had called him kin. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the stars beyond. Danny climbed into the shuttle, Karnix settling into the seat beside him. As they launched toward the distressed transport ship, Danny caught his reflection in the cockpit glass. The Crithian mark was still visible on his forehead, a permanent scar now, a reminder of the day everything changed. He smiled and turned his attention to the mission ahead. There were people who needed help, and he was good at helping people. The fear,